Soy el fuego que arde tu piel, soy el agua que mata tu sed, el castillo, la torre, yo soy, la espada que guarda el guardar, tú el aire que respiro yo, la luz de la luna en el mar, la garganta que ansio mojar, que temo ahogar de amor.
Welcome to the Beau Show, in pursuit of truth and tradition. You may recognize that song from Narcos called Tuyo by Rodrigo Amarante. I was watching an interview with him where he talked about the difference between his vote in the last election and his father's. He talked about how he and his father have differing opinions, but how important it is to talk with each other with whom we disagree. And I agree with that point. Well, as I hope we all can agree by now, the border issue is a crisis, as much as the media and the Biden administration have been reluctant to call it that. But it's more than just a border crisis. It's a humanitarian crisis, as we know, but it's also a policy crisis, a leadership crisis, a trafficking crisis, and a states' rights and taxpayer crisis as well, which we will discuss. During the 4 years of the Trump administration, illegal border crossings dropped, largely in part due to the administration's enforcement of laws already on the books, and a crackdown against cartel activity and trafficking. Smuggling is an intrinsic component of the illegal border activity because it can't really be done without cartels. CBP officials have seen migrants wearing bracelets, which smugglers use to keep track of migrants and whether or not they have paid them. Now, the Trump administration, in having enforced codified laws already on the books, received a plethora of criticism for separating children from their families, and you may recall the description of kids in cages. You probably even recall AOC's visit to the border and her emotionally clinging to the fence to prey on the public's emotions. However, AOC has not been back to the border, and you don't see her trying to rip that fence down anymore. In fact, she has since tweeted some additional interesting advice. Here's the tweet. It's only 2 months into this administration, and our fraught, unjust immigration system will not transform in that time. That's why bold reimagination is so important. DHS shouldn't exist. Agencies should be reorganized. ICE gotta go. Ban for-profit detention. Create climate refugee status, and more. So with the incredible influx in border crossings, AOC is actually suggesting getting rid of the Department of Homeland Security and Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE. That is a straight-up, unadulterated open borders policy she is advising. Customs and Border Protection encountered over 100,000 individuals in February, a 28% increase over January. Of those, about 19,000 individuals were in family units, 9,000 were unaccompanied children, and 71,000 were single adults. Chad Wolf, the former head of DHS in the Trump administration, has criticized the Biden administration for encouraging unaccompanied minors and others crossing the border for abusing the asylum qualification. Furthermore, it is well known that the smuggling of these children almost always requires cartel involvement, which is human trafficking. This represents a fundamental reason for separating children, actually, to determine whether anyone accompanying a minor is indeed family. Asylum has a very specific set of legal circumstances to be considered by courts. But the message is that if you come, you can just claim asylum and your claim will be adjudicated maybe a year or later while you are still remaining in America. And by the way, only about 1 in 5 asylum claims are actually granted. This is an abuse of the system because it is this messaging that reaches Mexico and Central America. Furthermore, the Biden administration has not been enforcing Title 42 of U.S. Code, which can turn away migrants due to health concerns such as, I don't know, the COVID-19 pandemic we're in. Biden has upended policy getting rid of former policies such as the Migrant Protection Program and asylum cooperative agreements, which we have with other compliant countries to address this crisis. So, in essence, the Trump administration's message was come, but do so legally. The Biden message has been come regardless, even if it means working with smugglers and traffickers. The fundamental difference in messaging goes straight to the traffickers, who benefit from a message like this. Families know if they send their kid to the border unaccompanied, the kid will not be turned away. where he or she will then be put in some sort of crowded facility with a bunch of other children with the hope that they will eventually make it to probably some family member residing in the United States. Now, if you come with a child under the age of 6, you are also admitted. Now look, let's take a step back. From the humane side of this, no one can argue that people from poor countries wish to create a better life in America. That's what we all call the American dream. But when there's an abuse of policy and law that disrespects everyone who has ever come to this country, who went about it the right way. You know, I recall meeting Inga Meyering Smith, a Jewish immigrant who became a teacher in Tennessee. She wrote a book called Made for America, in which she describes her journey from persecuted Jew during the Holocaust to American citizen. Now, at that time, if an immigrant had any adverse medical condition or even a lack of financial resources upon arrival, they could be denied entry. And if there ever were a cause for asylum, I think the Holocaust would be perhaps the most prime historical example of it. But now, especially in the middle of a public health crisis, policy is permitting anyone to come here at a time when you have been told to stay home, to quarantine, mask up, not socialize with anyone, not go exercise your freedom to worship, and to not patronize your local establishment. You've been doing this for over a year now. But at the border, it's come one, come all. This is the reason that Texas and 13 other states have filed an emergency application with the Supreme Court, asking to be allowed to defend the so-called public charge rule. The public charge rule requires immigrants to be able to support themselves financially. Now, that idea that immigrants should be able to do this and not become dependent on the government has long been a principle of the American experience. It's actually been around for centuries. These provisions have been a part of law since at least 1882. And even the colonies in the 1600s were screening potential immigrants coming here and requiring bonds. So the issue here is really twofold. First, there is the health concern that anyone can cross our southern border and bring the virus or other potential infections. That's what Title 42 of U.S. Code can address and has up until the current administration's policy changes. And then secondly, there is the social welfare element. How many of these immigrants that are coming here are financially solvent and can sustain themselves? One of the filers, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, notes that states have important interest in conserving their Medicaid and related social welfare budgets. He states that providing for the healthcare needs of economically disadvantaged individuals represents a substantial portion of the state's budget. For example, just in Texas in 2020, over 4 million Texans relied on Medicaid. So as we frame this issue, you cannot view it only emotionally, as AOC tried to do. And even then, her suggestion to get rid of the agencies that are overworked and at capacity to handle this crisis in the most humanitarian way is simply asinine. Millions of Americans dealt with unprecedented stakes last year between death of loved ones, reduction of liberties, severe financial loss and employment. But the new administration is suggesting that your sacrifice is subservient to non-citizens. There's a fair argument to be made, actually, that the citizens of Portland and Seattle needed asylum last year from violent riots. But they were given little relief. Businesses were destroyed. The administration is also heavily reducing media observation of the border facilities, which likely means they're embarrassed. Several GOP senators have recently visited the border to observe the scene. Senator John Kennedy points out the result of the Biden policy. Take a look.
What you see behind me, these children and these mothers and fathers and relatives, is a direct result of President Biden's policies.
He also notes in his always satirical manner the wisdom of such policy.
I'm not sure there are words in English to describe it. If you talk to the Border Patrol agents, those women and men will tell you that what President Biden is doing is bone deep down to the marrow stupid.
Senator Ted Cruz just told the media that a DHS official refused to allow him to take photos of the conditions at the border. Yet previously, it seemed like a perfect opportunity for AOC to take her staged photo. To this date, neither President Biden nor Vice President Harris have visited the U.S.-Mexico border. I think we all can empathize with anyone who wants to come to this country and make a new life for themselves and a better opportunity. No one can fault someone for that. But we also have to look at what real persecution actually looks like and compare that with relocation from a less fortunate nation. There are laws on our books that are precise about this, and to abuse those laws is to fail not just our own citizens, but the immigrants themselves. In Hong Kong, the Epoch Times is reporting that a court has ruled that even talking about pro-democracy protest can be considered a crime. And Muslim Uyghurs in China are in detention camps. Who has a better claim for asylum? Are we just supposed to forget about these human rights violations because AOC didn't tweet a photo about it? Let's also face these recent numbers. A Border Patrol section chief reports that more than 861 criminals have been caught recently, including 92 sex offenders and 63 gang members. That's a far cry from the picture that you are being sold today. Do you want those 800 criminals in your neighborhood? Immigration is a tough issue, but it has come to a tipping point, and it's no longer just about the emotional element. You know, there are real stakes at hand that affect our economy and our public health. If we can't even take care of our own less fortunate, how in the world can we take care of other countries? Let's just remember that both Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have had decades collectively of time in the Senate to address this, and they never did. Yet more and more Hispanic people, particularly here in South Florida where I'm located, are leaning conservative because of the dire circumstances from which they came. They recognize it. The ones who did so legally are not so thrilled with this current abuse of the system. They did it fairly, and they want others to abide by the same rules. It really is a privilege to live here, but we have to ensure the public good, which can't be viewed only through the prism of an emotional perspective. We can have heart while also using logic. It's the only way we will make the right decisions. Juntos podemos encontrar verdad, tradición y libertad. I'm Beau, and that's the show.
¿Y cuáles deseos me vas a dar? Oh, dices tú, mi tesoro, basta con mirarlo y tuyo será, y tuyo será.